For me, it's very important also to know where are your roots when you're making wine. And I know exactly which kind of wine I want to make. And which kind of wine I want to make is wine that will express the most where they're coming from.
Hey, this is Harman Skurnik, and welcome to another episode of Skurnik Unfiltered. Today I am joined by our Chief French Officer, David Hinkle, who sat down recently with one of our old friends from Burgundy, Cyprien Arlaud.
What a treat to talk to him. I think for both of us, Harman, this is a long relationship. I started with Cyprien's father, Hervé, in the early 90s. Cyprien came in the late 90s. And the biodynamic aspect of what he's doing, and particularly the seamless, low extraction, just silky smooth Burgundy he's making I know we both love.
Oh, absolutely. And he's a big friend to the company. We've been working together for such a long time. I think it was 1993, the first vintage we worked with them. I remember working with his dad, Hervé. They always had the best terroir, but Hervé wasn't quite as accomplished a winemaker as Cyprien has become. And I remember going into the cellar and we had to choose certain barrels and have them bottled because not all the wines were great. Well, under Cyprien and under his biodynamic principles and all his responsible farming and meticulousness, the wines are consistently great.
Agreed 100%. He has taken the domain and his sister in the vineyards with the horse plowing and the approach that they started really late 90s, early 2000s. I don't know that there's any more respected grower in Burgundy today in terms of the overall approach in the vineyards, in the cellar, non-intervention. And he's just such a thoughtful, articulate individual that I think folks are going to love to listen to him talk about Burgundy.
No doubt about it. You mentioned his sister. She has this horse plowing business that not only does she handle the horse plowing for the family's vineyards, but for many, many producers throughout the Côte d'Or, right?
Yeah, she's trained a lot of the great domains across France. And as a very young, she was, I think, 22, and her love of horses kind of helped bring back, she was one of the early adopters to helping not trample the vineyards with tractors and kind of making them more airy. And now so many people are doing, she was one of the first.
It's amazing some of these, like what we call innovations, whether it be biodynamic farming or horse plowing. A lot of people refer to these practices as kind of new and natural, but aren't they a return to the way things used to be before mechanization, chemicals, and all these things? So it's really more traditional farming than it is new. And
Totally. And I think Cyprien in the cellar has done exactly the same thing. Low sulfur, not much new wood, a little bit of whole cluster, really a light touch in the cellar that is the same they're doing in the vineyards, a light touch with the horses, which, Cyprien loves to say it's easier to make wine when you've got a healthy, vibrant soil and microorganisms as opposed to a freeway, which is what the vineyards were when those tractors just beat them down into almost concrete back when you and I started going and visiting the vineyards.
well, as always, David, you are eloquent when you describe these growers and their attributes, but I think Cyprien is also quite eloquent. And let's listen into your conversation with Cyprien Arlaud.
I have the immense pleasure of being with Cyprien Arlaud from Domaine Arlaud in Moray-Saint-Denis. This is a special moment for me because I have worked with Cyprien's family since 1990, I think was when I first met your father, Hervé. And Cyprien came on in 96 part-time, 98 full-time. So I've got to see his journey with his father, who still is there every day, and his sister. And it's really amazing to see where you are today. And today we're going to try to dive into a lot of the things that make your property, you as a grower and a winemaker, so very special. Thank you for being here, Cyprien Arlaud.
Thank you, David. I'm so glad to be here today to show the wine at Skurnik and also to tell about my way of a winemaker, wine grower since I joined the domain in 96, 98.
I think let's start with I love to talk about generational changes in properties because it isn't always easy to have a son take over for a father and also have another sibling, your sister. And I wanted to just maybe talk about how it is you're taking over in essentially 1998 and what it was like and what it is like with your father, who I think it's been a very, very beautiful transition.
Yeah, first I was very lucky to arrive on the family estates found by my grandfather, and with a father was very involved at this time, end of the 90. He was waiting for me to come on the domain, and he was very open mind to every ideas I had to go to more quality in the wine and also more precision in the vineyards. So it's a real luck, in fact, when you join a family domain and they will expect from you to bring something. So very quickly we can move many things in the cellar, and I will say mainly first in the vineyards, because when I joined the domain, I had some conviction with the organic farming. I grew up with my mother with this approach of nature, and it was a very good way for me to become a winemaker, to do it in my work every day. So from the very beginning, I start to turn and go in the organic direction in the vineyard. So we stop herbicide, we stop pesticide, and very quickly in 2004, we were fully organic. So it was one of the huge change on the domain. And my father was in charge of the domain at this time, was pushing also in this way, which is a big quality, I think, for a wine grower. When you have somebody joining you, it can be your son or your daughter. It's a big change for a farmer to change the way you farm. And he was open minded and he was supporting me. So we were very successful very quickly with this new direction.
So, if I remember correctly, it was two vineyards that your father first said, Cyprien, take on these challenges. I think it was Charme Chambertin and Maurice Saint-Denis Premier Cru Chazot that were kind of your first, before you started maybe full time. He said, look, I want you to attack improving the quality of these wines and the work in these vineyards. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's. I think it's always good to don't switch 100% of what you used to do in one day. So it's very important to experiment first, and that's what I done with the Charme, with the Chazot, and also with our Bourgogne Roncevy. So we experimented since 2002, some farming organic, fully organic on those vineyards, and we were successful. So he said, okay, well, let's do it for all the rest of the domain.
What were some of the small things that you tested, that you tried, that you quickly decided, okay, this is where I want to put all of my energies? And what were the inspirations behind some of that?
First, the inspiration has to be conviction. Something you think it will be a plus for you every day. It will be a plus for the vines to look better. It will be a plus for the soil to be healthier. And it was first a conviction, a vision. Then when you make wine, there's nothing natural. It's all under control because we graft the plant, we prune it, we plow the vineyards. We drive the vineyards in a specific direction to make the wine we want to make. But even if nothing is natural, it's very important for me to consider that you're working with nature and you have to find the balance with the control you're having on it and also the part of nature itself. We can do things you will never imagine.
So, what were some of the first changes that you brought to these three sites that you were working with?
One of the main change was to stop herbicide and to plow every vineyard. And so we're back to 98. And in this approach, we were pushing very far because I was lucky to have my sister who wanted to join the domain at this time. And we decided to buy 2 horses with all the equipment.
This was in what year?
We started the horse plowing in 2003. And since we never stopped, since 2003, with no interruption, we've been plowing every Premier Cru and every Grand Cru by horses. So it was a very, very, let's say, strong approach to reduce the compaction in the soil and to have a great care for the healthiness of the soil.
I think it's become much more widespread recently in many parts of France in vineyards. What are the advantages? What do you see in the vineyards as you start to do horse plowing?
One thing first will make me go in this direction with the soil, will make me realize that the soil was very important. And it looks funny, but 30 years ago, it was not so evident for every producers. But there are a couple of engineer biologists, their name Claude and Lydia Bourguignon. And in 2000, they published an article saying there is more life on the moon than there is in the vineyards of Montrachet in Burgundy. So it was shocking title, but it was to say that not every producer, but certain producer, they're using some herbicide, they're not plowing anymore, and it's risky for the soil because if you check the life with analyses, you can see there's no life anymore in the soil. So when I realized that, and when we move in this direction, one of the first huge benefits we have, we can see the population of microorganism, insect was coming back in the soil because when it's not compacted anymore, when there's no any more pollution in the soil, then you get the water, you get the air in the soil, and you get the life will develop. And the soil is not just a plate for the vines, it's not just a base for the plant. The soil has to be alive, has to be itself like the plant, living. The soil has to be living.
I remember vividly that 25 years ago, there were many vineyards in Burgundy that were like cement between the rows, literally so hard and compacted that it was water ran off of them. Then you step in a vineyard that had been plowed even with a tractor, but then further with a horse, which doesn't push it down as much as a tractor, almost spongy, which obviously it's hard to live if you're like cement.
No, it's true. It's true. So one of the first very huge benefit we get by having a specific care for the soil is we stop erosion. We had a very good texture of soil, and the soil, when it's alive, has much more capacity, ability to keep the water. So it's very useful in the dry vintages.
Which we've had a few of lately.
Yeah, we had a few of them. And also it has the possibility to drain the water when there is too much water. So it's important to fix the soil. So for that, the soil have to be alive, and the soil will make the job with the water for the plant. One thing also is very important, like the soil is like a microbiota for the vines. So if the soil have a huge diversity, the vine will grow up with much more healthiness and protection.
We've had some recent vintages, a lot of very warm vintages, especially 98, 2003, 2009, more recently, a lot more. However, we have had some vintages where it was difficult. It was like it was 20 years ago with rain and cool weather and difficult conditions. I think a lot of people would like to understand how you dealt with these vintages. I'm thinking 21, 24. You can take it back further than that if you want, where it maybe wasn't so obvious to you and your team how you were going to manage these difficult conditions when it wasn't warm and sunny with a nice wind and breeze to keep the vines super healthy.
So the key is the team. If by the time you decide to respect the vines and the soil and to use only copper and sulfur and less as possible, then you need to have a good team, well trained, good organization to be efficient, to be able to adapt to the weather. And when you get lots of rain or not enough sun, there is things to do in the vineyards. You have to put more hands in the vineyards. And you know the expression in French, we say la main verte, the green hand. And the green hand is the care you pay to the vines. And when the sun is there, the sun brings this kind of care for the vineyards. But when the sun is missing, you have to treat the vines with your proper hands more, to hold the branches, to de-leaf by hand, to don't get any rottiness in the vineyards, to make the canopy a good aeration. You have to sometimes to plow with your hand, to have a good idea of what we're doing in difficult vintages. We reduce the stress the vineyards get from the weather by the care we're bringing on the vineyards. with many, many specific works, all done by hand, and the vines like it.
That takes a lot of work. I mean, it's not something simple. So I remember you talking in a couple different vintages where you literally asked yourself and your team, can I continue to ask everybody to put in this? Because in some vintages, I would call you and it'd be, 7 days a week in the vineyards, 12 hours a day. And you were pushing hard because if it rains, you have to go back out and do the same work again the next day.
Yeah, and I learned about that. I learned about vintages like 16. 16 was very extreme. So I learned about 16, and then for vintage like 24, we had also extreme condition, but we were well much more organized with more people, and also with my experience, I was very care about doing more, working more in the vineyards, but also be careful about our capacity to go still with energy until the end of the end. Because one thing I learned is if you spend all your energy trying to fight with the weather, at one point you risk to hurt your body. Or if you're lucky, if you don't hurt your body, at the end you're so exhausted, then you don't take the good decision for the end of the vintage. So for me, one thing I really learned, and what I've done in 24, is until the end, we still have a bit of energy to make good choices for picking, good choices for vinification. And by the time you press, you can be exhausted. But before, you still need to have your mind awake, not exhausted, and do the job. So it's really a question of organization, passion of the team, and the power you can put in the vineyards again, a weather which is not perfect.
Yeah. It was very emotional for me to hear you talk about it. And 16 was one of those vintages where I think you and your team realized that one, you could trust your vines, that the work you had done since 2003, 2004, the changes that you had progressively made, that your vineyards were strong, healthy, and even if the conditions were extreme, that you, your vines, and your team could manage it to the best of your ability and come up with a very good result, which I know a lot of people gave up and went back to more conventional methods. So that's something that I felt very strongly that you talked about quite a bit. I want to talk about your winemaking journey because with your father and then you taking over, and as a young winemaker, I think you might agree you made some wines that were maybe a little more powerful. You've maybe used less new wood today than you used to use. You've done some different things. Can you talk a little bit about maybe your winemaking journey from how your approach to Pinot Noir, your terroirs since maybe 98 to today?
Yeah, I was very focused at the beginning when I joined the domain on the vineyard with this organic and biodynamic approach. And I realized in the same time, of course, then I have to be more precise in the cellar and adapt the percentage of new oak. Also in the vinification, be very careful about the extraction, the way I was punching down, and how long I keep the wine in the vat fermenting. And since 2004, I built my proper winery with all the equipment adapted to the vinification I want to do. And we turn organic. And since 2004, I've been doing a long way of evolution in the cellar and in my approach in the vinification. So I've always been a fan of cool vintages in Burgundy. And I understood also that the weather is changing. And even having warmer weather, riper vintages, it's always very important to look into each vintages that is part of energy and freshness. So the farming, the biodynamic farming helps me a lot, but also the vinification that I'm doing now and the aging I'm doing in the cellar has been really adapted to this goal, to have wine with a beautiful elegance, a high intensity, and aging with maximum of 15-20% of new oak, or even no any new oak at all for several Grand Cru, or no any New York, like vintage 2024, there's no new oak in any wines. So now I can say I can adapt much more better the kind of barrel I'm using, which forest, which toast, which percentage of New York, the proportion of the lees I'm using, the quality of the lees, which is in contact with the wine during the maturation of the wine. And one thing also I realize is the job I'm doing in the vineyards. It's the first part of the life of the wine. And there is a second part of life in the wine, which is the same thing. It's a second season. It's not outside, but the second season starts in the cellar, in the winery and in the cellar. So now I can say I have the same care, same attention and precision for what I'm doing in the vineyards to find the perfect balance of healthiness with the vine and the soil and the quality of the grapes that I'm looking for in the vineyards, with the perfect balance of the oak, of the lees, of the time of aging, the way I don't rack the wine anymore, and also the very low sulfur I'm using with no filtration, no stirring. So it's a very pure approach in the cellar with a high care, high precision, because if you don't use any sophisticated techniques in the winery like I do in the vineyards, it's the same. You need the care. You need human care in the cellar.
You can't make mistakes.
You can make mistake. You have to follow, when you bottle the wine, the perfect timing with the moon. If the wine is not going on itself, it has to be open, more or less, depend on the quantity you have to bottle, if it's a smaller appellation or a larger tank. So all those details have been fixed. People can say the wine is made in the field, which is not true. The quality is made in the field. You make the quality in the vineyards, but you make the wine in the cellar.
I truly believe that since 16, you have not had a bad vintage. Every vintage, all different, very different, but beautiful, consistent, from the Bourgogne Ronceville, your kind of signature Bourgogne entry-level wine, to your Grand Cru. Very consistent. 22 and 23, I think, are very interesting vintages because 22 and 23 are both warm, but different vintages, very different. Tasting them, you can see the difference. Can you talk about 22 and 23 in terms of what you just described, kind of your approach to winemaking and how each of them, you let them express themselves, I'm going to say, in a beautiful way, but differently?
Yeah, so I will say since 19, I understood and I know exactly which kind of wine I want to make. And which kind of wine I want to make is wine that will express the most where they're coming from. And one skill of Burgundy is to be able, even in a warm vintage, to express each character of each climat, each terroir. So in 22, it's what I did with the same approach. And we had a lot of sun. So in this way, maybe the vintage is printing a little bit more the wine right now, but every wine they're superb. 22, it's nature, make the things in the right way. About 23 was a different story. 23 was a very challenging vintage. Things was not such easy with the weather, but one thing was very interesting. It's obliged us to invest a lot of time and decide for the good option we had to do during the vintage. So I would say 22 is more vintage of nature, and 23 is more vintage of wine grower, winemaker. And if you do the good choices in 23, good choices for me was about the pruning. Don't prune too early in 23. The de-leafing also, to have a good aerated canopy. Good timing for picking, and before picking, one of the main important things you have to anticipate in 23 was the generous vigor of the vineyards. Because one thing with the global warming is climate change will push down the yield, the vigor of the vine, some vintages, but it will push very high other vintages when everything is there. So when it's warm, when you get the rain, it's like, I won't say tropical condition for the vineyards, but the vineyards will have more vigor. So by the time you understand that, in 23, we had a very good flowering. We had a very good growing season and the berries were there. So
Potential for a very big crop.
very big crop. So we anticipated that because we always in the vineyards, so we did more debudding, and we also did some green harvest. So green harvest is an old technique, old artificial technique to reduce the yield because you drop some green grapes down before harvest, which I hate to do it. And I don't need to do it anymore with the natural vigor of the vineyards than I get with the biodynamic farming. But in 23, I anticipated and I dropped some grapes from every vineyard, including the village. So Grand Cru, Premier Cru, and Village Wine. So it was a huge job. We have to do it on our own because if you do it, you have to know how to prune, you have to know how to respect the sap in the vines, in the plant. So it was a very, very, very tough job, very long job. We did it twice before the grapes start to ripe and just after the grapes finished to turn red. And it was one of the best anticipating choices I've made in 23 because we had a very good concentration, very well balanced grapes and not too much grapes. So we finished the job with a very high good sorting. And 23 with all those many choices gave me probably the wine I always dream to make.
They're explosive aromatically. They're beautiful in the mouth. It's a beautiful vintage. I want to talk about Rousseau, one of my favorite wines going back to the first time I met your father and been the old cellar in Nuit Saint-Georges, because I think it's a very special site that I know you're very attached to. It's your home village, but it's also a very special vineyard and I think represents a lot of what your property is about and kind of your vision of things.
Yeah. So Moret-Saint-Denis, Premier Cru, Rousseau has been there for forever. It's located between two very historical climats. One is Clos de Tard and one is Clos de la Bussière. They've been both stabilized by two different abbeys more than 600 years ago. And between you have the Rousseau, and the Rousseau is located in a paradise for vineyards because the soil and the geology is very complex, very rich in mineral. And mineral, they're very important. Like if you look, I don't know, Amoureuse, Musigny, even Vaune Romanée, it's very rich in mineral, iron. So Rousseau is one part of those clima in Moret-Saint-Denis, which have this richness in the soil where the vines just grow very well and make very great grapes in it. So the Rousseau is also have this proper micro weather, protected from the cold wind from the north with 3 walls. And when you get there, you also can feel the energy of the place. So the Rousseau have this energy focused on the vineyards, and I think it goes into the wine. So I love Rousseau. For me, maybe Rousseau is the equivalent of a Clos Saint-Jacques of Moret-Saint-Denis through the 20 Premier Cru. It's one I think it's very important to look after if you want to understand what is Moret character. And it's the pure definition and example of what is a clima. And it always makes me sense to, if I have a very complicated or important decision, I'm going into the Rousseau and I walk a bit, I prune a bit the vineyards, and the good choice is coming.
So it helps you with your tough decisions. I know you've talked about too that it's this place that maybe because of the walls, it's down below the road. You're between what were 2 abbeys. You say that you don't need your phone. The church bells ring. You don't need a clock. And it kind of brings you back to hundreds and hundreds of years ago.
If you go in the Rousseau, you're like the vine. You focus on yourself. And it's very important. And the vines who grow up in the Rousseau, they focus on themselves. They really try to express what they are. And it's the same when I work in the vineyards of Rousseau. You're in Burgundy, you're in a pure climat. Whatever the century, you're making wine. For me, it's very important also to know where are your roots when you're making wine. And when you're in Burgundy, when you're a vigneron of Moret-Saint-Denis, and you have to find your roots, you go in the Rousseau.
The last thing I want to talk about is Charme-Chambertin. It's maybe not your most famous Grand Cru, but I know it's a special place because it's one of the places that you started your career as a farmer. And you're also in an area, there's a lot of inspiration. You're just below La Luz, La Trissière, and it's kind of a special place in Charme. Can you talk a little bit about Charme-Chambertin?
Yeah, Charme-Chambertin is a large appellation, so many producers are making Charme. And what I learned with the Charme-Chambertin is you also have, when you're somewhere, in a large appellation, and you're not in Moray, so you will play with the Chambertin. You make wine, and they will be compared to Rousseau, many others, famous producer of Gevrey. They are making Charme. So when I am in Charme, I started to look my neighbors. It's true, and La Lobise was just up of us in the Latricière. Some other famous producer, they're just below us. We are located in the top part of the Mazoyère Chambertin. And I learn with the Charme Chambertin, then you have to understand your environment. And you also have to sometimes to be more involved in the choices you make. And with Charme Chambertin, I do 3 different picking, even it's the same plot. I do 2 different vinification, even it's the same plot, 2 different aging, and one part of the Charme Chambertin, the younger part, can be declassified and goes in the Gevrey village to think about the blend, to have a very high level of quality with my Charme Chambertin. So the Charme Chambertin make me understood the part of responsibility I have as a wine grower and a winemaker by making a wine of Climat in Burgundy. And when I started, I thought, okay, you're just making wine from a place, and that's the place who make the wine. And with the Charme Chambertin, I understood you have the place, and inside of the place, you have your vision, your interpretation of the place. And with the Charme Chambertin, I probably have a huger part of my interpretation into the wine to make it as a Charme Chambertin with the idea I have from this wine to be, which is very, very exciting, because you're pushing the wine in the direction of you want the wine to go. And sometimes the wine just say, no, I'm there.
It's one of those wines that I think, going back to working with your father at the very beginning, that I think has taken maybe one of the largest progress in quality. Not that your father didn't make a good or very good Charme Chambertin, but I think now your Charme Chambertin is at a very, very high level. Every single vintage, 22 and 23, are really great ones.
For me, it's very important. It's you have a large choice of Charme Chambertin. So when I make my Charme Chambertin, everything I do from the very beginning is to be part of the... I want to be in the first division, but I also... It's not like competition. I just want to express the Charme Chambertin like any wine lover will be surprised. We get emotion with the Charme Chambertin. And for me, the best respectful things we have to do for wine lovers, for wine Burgundy lovers, they should get the best from the Grand Cru and maybe the best from the Charme Chambertin, because large choices. So whatever way you are in the Charme Chambertin, if you have a Charme Chambertin, you might have this seductive Grand Cru from Gevrey, maybe the most charming wine from Gevrey, to make you follow and go on the other Grand Cru of Gevrey. But it's the first gate for me to be introduced in the 9 Grand Cru of Gevrey. So that's why I have a huge discipline to make it from the higher level I can.
Last night, just to finish, we had a lot of people at a wine dinner, a lot of 23s, some 22s, and I think a lot of them from the Bourgogne-Ranceville 23 all the way up to Clos La Roche and Charme Chambertin. There was a lot of emotion and passion for the wines, and real pleasure, Cyprien, to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Thank you to Skurnik. My pleasure to share this emotion I have making the wine, than giving the emotion in the glass.
You achieve that every time we pop a cork.
Thank you.
Skurnik Unfiltered is recorded at Skurnik Wines and Spirits headquarters in the Flatiron District of New York City, which is why you might hear some city noises as we go along, like horns honking. If you found the conversation interesting, please consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a review. You can stay up to date on our show and upcoming events by following Skurnik Wines on Instagram and visiting our website at skurnik.com.